Hello, everyone. This is Joe from St. Bernard Acres. I thought I would do something a little different today. Um, One of the things, it's bitterly cold out there, so there's no going out to do anything. So I thought, what an opportunity to talk about homesteading, and primarily the Homestead Act of 1862, uh, and just a little history of it and my thoughts on where it's led to, where we are. The idea of homesteading the land dates all the way back to the First Continental Congress and the Revolutionary War, where it was passed at the First Continental Congress that any man who volunteered for the Army to fight the British in the War of Independence would be granted anywhere from 100 acres to 500 acres, depending on the rank they achieved while they were in service. So that was, it dates all the way back to the founding of this country. So this whole notion of homesteading is nothing new. This isn't recently thought up. Although it's become very popular recently for various reasons. I mean, there are as many reasons for homesteading as there are people who decide to do it. Part of the whole homesteading thing, at least on YouTube that I see, and just a personal observation here, the whole homesteading and off-grid thing, for a lot of channels, that's simply become a marketing term. They use it in the name of their channels. The title of their videos have to have, those keywords, off-grid, homestead. Those have to be in the titles of the movies. So, if nothing else, it's a great marketing tool. And it's had the opportunity now to become very commercialized, and companies are making money off of it, which is what happens to everything. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen to everything. It does. If something becomes the least bit popular, someone else is going to jump on it and try to make money off of the deal. So this is just a little history of the Homestead Act, and how it's progressed throughout the years, and how we've kind of gotten to where we are today. So I hope you enjoy this. I'll try not to make it too long, but I think it'll be fun and it'll be interesting. So thank you all for watching. Let's look at it. The Homestead Act was passed on May 20th, 1862, and signed into law by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. It was intended to populate the West. I mean, it encompassed the area between the west of the Mississippi and east of the Rockies. A lot of the land that we got in the Louisiana Purchase. If you look at the Louisiana Purchase, what we got for $15 million equated to about 4 cents an acre at that time. So the land that we bought for 4 cents an acre, which is pretty cheap land. But what it did, it entitled a citizen to claim 160 acres of government surveyed land. The requirements were simple. I mean, you went out, you paid a $10 fee at the land register office and staked your claim, and that was your 160 acres. If you lived on it for 5 years, and you had to make improvements to it, you had to build a dwelling, you had to cultivate the land, and use it in a homestead environment. At the end of the 5 years, you would have to get 2 of your neighbors to sign off saying that you had proven up the land, and you paid an $8 final fee, and you got a free and clear deed to the property. Now, if you didn't want to wait the 5 years, after 6 months, you could purchase the land for $1.25 an acre. Then you didn't have to fulfill the requirements of building a dwelling on it and making improvements or cultivating it. If you were a Union soldier, you could deduct your time in service from the 5-year requirement. So if you served in the Union Army for 2 years, you only had to live on that claim for 3 years before you could make it your own. It was for citizens of the United States, immigrants who intended to become citizens, freed slaves could file a claim, and for the first time, it was written that head of households could do it, which meant that widows and single women could file a claim and own property, and get their 160 acres as long as they fulfilled those requirements. Now, the problem with the way the law was written, it was so ambiguously framed that it really didn't work well. A majority of the settlers who made claims couldn't, once they made the trip out there from the east, they couldn't afford to build houses. They didn't have money to buy seed or buy livestock. So it failed in that respect. And in the beginning, a lot of the claims were made by people in neighboring states. The idea was to get people from the crowded East Coast cities to move out to the West. But a lot of claims were from, Illinois, Minnesota, states that were already formed, but they could expand their existing homesteads. So it wasn't so much everybody moving out west. And it also left it wide open for fraud. A lot of the land wound up, with speculators, with miners, with ranchers, foresters. Only the railroads took a lot of claims. So only about 15% of the 500 million acres that was dispersed was actually homesteaded by homesteaders. So it had its problems, but the idea was sound. in 1909, what they did, they enacted the enlarged Homestead Act. And that was passed so that instead of 160 acres of land, you could get 320 acres. Most of the prime land that had access to water or rivers, had already been taken by that time. So they upped the ante basically to 320 acres if you would move out to it in Homestead. That was good. I mean, there was a whole influx of people, moved out there to take advantage of that. Interestingly enough, these people didn't know farming. They didn't know proper cultivation or irrigation techniques. They didn't know the ecological impact of things that they did. And the way they farmed this is ultimately what led to the Dust Bowls of the 1930s. There were many other enhancements or fixes to the original Homestead Act through the years that, tried to address certain problems. And, a lot of it worked. In 1875, they decided to let Indians, how ironic is that, make claims if they were willing to abandon their tribal relations and become United States citizens. That's the way an Indian could become a United States citizen. But they would have to, abandon all of their tribal relations and give up that culture entirely. Which, basically, they took the land from the Indians, and then, that was a self-governing, all of the tribes in the West. The government went in, took all of it, divided it up to let citizens go. I think what it did, it put taxpayers out there. The government was going to make a lot more money off of taxes from the homesteaders than they were from the Indians. It's a shame that all of that went down, and it's kind of to me, it's an embarrassment on our country, what we did. But I'm not going to get into the political aspect or my thoughts on that part of it. Just in 1875, they opened it up to Indians. In 1877, the Desert Land Act was added to the bill, which increased your acreage. You could get 640 acres on the same idea, of homesteading it for 5 years. You would wind up with 640 acres. You could claim, I believe earlier than that, with the original Homestead Act, I believe if you were going to raise livestock on it, you could get 640 acres then. But as far as desert lands and dry farming, if you were willing to accept that, you would get a 640 acre tract of land. That was added in 1877. In 1898, Alaska was added to the Homestead Act, which ironically was the last state to have a claim filed in. In 1934, the Taylor Grazing Act appeared, and that took millions of acres to be used as grazing districts. It pretty much ended homesteading claims in the original area of the West. And what the Taylor Grazing Act, in its simplicity, said was cattlemen and ranchers, for a minimal fee, could lease that land to graze their cattle on. It didn't give them the rights to it. And at the time, the cattle barons, if you will, and the land barons, they tried to control all of that land. And any smaller ranchers, they tried to push out. That's another whole part of history of the cattle wars that, you can research or we can explore later if we wanted to. But the Taylor Grazing Act tried to make it to where any size of rancher or anybody trying to raise cattle could graze on those lands. It could no longer be claimed as homestead property. And that, that's part of it. Lately what's been in the news with the Bundys out in Nevada, the Hammonds. It's like, they were using the land, abusing the land, not paying for it, building fires, starting fires on it to fix it their way, whatever. But that was from 1934 that law was passed. And in 1946, the Bureau of Land Management was formed to manage all of this homesteading and the grazing districts. So that's where the BLM comes into it, and it becomes BLM property. And it's for everybody, not just cattle ranchers, not just, the cowboys, but it's for all of us. We can go there and camp. We can go, it's public lands, which means it's ours. It's not anybody else's. So that's my take on that. But that's kind of the synopsis of the Homesteading Act and how it came about. And some interesting facts. The first homesteader, the law took effect January 1st, 1863. And Daniel Freeman was at the time a Union soldier. And he wanted some land in Cub Creek near Beatrice, Nebraska. And he had to be at Fort Leavenworth on the 2nd. So what he did, he convinced the land office there in Beatrice to open at midnight on January 1st so he could make his claim to get that 160 acres that he wanted. And the guy that ran the land office, was kind enough to go ahead and open up and let him make his claim at midnight on January 1st, 1863. So that was the first homestead claimed under the Homestead Act. And after he served in 1865, he came back after he served his time in the Union Army and built a cabin and proved up the land. He later bought a lot more land around that original homestead that he claimed. And in the 30s, the National Park Service bought his original homestead that he had gotten and preserved it. You know, it's now a national park. It's a, gosh, I can't think of what they call it, but you can go there and see his original homestead. And it's pretty neat. I mean, it's you know, if you're out traveling through Nebraska, stop and take a peek at it. Because that's all of us who want to get into homesteading. That kind of like is a highlight in the history of homesteading. But the National Park Service owns it now. So they bought it. And let's see some other interesting things about it. Yeah, Confederate soldiers, part of the thing with you had to be a citizen, intended on becoming a citizen. You could not have borne arms against the United States. So that eliminated Confederate soldiers. They could not make a claim. The original bill it failed a few times before they finally figured out what they wanted to do with it. The North was very concerned that some of the plantation owners in the South would go out there and make claims and then put slave labor out there to do the work on it. And that was totally, you know, against anything the North wanted to accomplish. And the South was worried that these states would become free states and upset the balance of slave states and free states. So there was a lot of bickering back and forth before the final, Homestead Act was, solved. When they opened up Oklahoma, they opened up 2 million acres for claim. And the day before that opened up, people started gathering, and they wound up with 50,000 people that, at the stroke of midnight, took off to go place a claim somewhere in Oklahoma within those 2 million acres. So what had happened, a few of the settlers had snuck onto the lands, a couple days before and hid out on the claims that they wanted to make. And they called those peoples the Sooners. So, as you know, the Oklahoma Sooners, that's where that comes from. Because back then they were called Sooners, because they snuck onto the lands to hide out and make their claim. Once it opened up, they could say that they got there first. The last claim made and filed was in Alaska in 1986. The act was repealed in 1976, but it took several years to get everything closed up, and there were a lot of claims hanging on, and that were still doing their time, and they had to finish all that out. But what is recognized as the very last claim under the Homestead Act of 1862 was completed in Alaska in 1986. So there is kind of a little bit of history of the Homesteading Act. Welcome back. I do hope you enjoyed that, my take on the history and some of the thoughts of the Homesteading Act of 1862. That leads us into modern day homesteading. I think the modern day homesteading can trace its roots back to the yeah, 60s and 70s with the whole back to the land movement. Um, where people wanted to live a more self-reliant lifestyle on the land, and thanks to publications like the Whole Earth Catalog and Mother Earth News, a lot of city dwellers went out back to the country. They practiced DIY building, farming, gardening, and they popularized the whole idea of solar and wind power to get off the grid before going off the grid was the popular thing to do. And they brought the homesteading term, out of the closet and wiped it off and made it new again. So that lasted for a couple decades, and then the 80s, the 90s, those were really flourishing times. There were tons of money. We were all making money. Life was good. So we never thought about that. But now times are different. Times have changed. There's no certainty anymore. The one thing that we're certain of, something's going to happen. As to what it is, when it happens, there's a million different theories on that, but something has to change. It has to be a drastic change. So today's homesteaders are, it's, except for the established homestead. I mean, there's homesteads that have been for generations. But the new popularity of homesteading, and people like me who've never done it before, they go out and buy 10 acres of land and try to build something on it. I feel a need for that. I want to try to sever, or at least, loosen the ties to the big chain supermarkets and the power grid and debt and consumerism, and the whole prepper movement has been influential on the homesteading movement as well. It's like homesteaders are the original preppers. They are the most prepared of the preppers, in my opinion, with their knowledge base, their skills. Today's new preppers, can learn everything they need from the homesteaders who have been doing it for years. Before it was popular to do it, before it was popular to be a prepper, they were already doing it. My idea of homesteading, what I'm trying to do, is simply provide at least some of the food that I eat, provide some of the fuel that I use for heat, meet my own power requirements through wind and solar that I need to live a comfortable modern life. Without having to leave the property to do that. I'm not interested in living a pioneer lifestyle. I'm not, going to be lighting my house with kerosene lamps and, washing my clothes down at the creek. I'm not going to go out and kill game so we can eat that night. I'm not into that. I just want to be a little bit more in control of what I eat and what I do. And by not leaving the property, I simply mean, no longer having to work 60 hours a week like we do now to make somebody rich. not to have to pay off a mortgage to a bank or all this debt to make someone else even richer. Um, just be more reliant on myself. Because there are all of these skills that are needed that I don't have. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. So by virtue of this community, uh, I'm able to learn some of these skills. I'm able to practice some of these skills, and which is great. That's what makes the homestead community what it is. I it sounds, self-reliant, self-sufficient. I'm taking care of my land. It's all greed. We're all self, and for selfish reasons, we're doing this. I don't want it to go that far. I don't want, I don't like selfish people. And there are a few on YouTube, and a few, more than a few, in personal life. They're very selfish. And they're very obnoxious in the way they present themselves and the manner they interact with other people. I think part of homesteading is being humble, appreciating everything, and not being afraid to work for it. That's a big part of it. You can't be lazy and try to build a homestead. You can't be poor and try to do it either. It is not a cheap thing to do. It's easy to, build a shack out of pallets and, live like that and call yourself an off-grid homesteader. You can build structures using reclaimed material, and that's great, but, the place looks like, poverty. I'm not living in poverty. I'm not living in squalor. If I have to work, then I will work. I mean, that's the way it is. But if I can avoid some of that work, then that's good for me. I have more. Every hour that I don't have to go to work is an hour I can live. Because I don't look at this as a life. Coming to work is not life. Being out at St. Bernard Acres, I'm living. So the less I have to come in here and earn money, the more I can actually live life and enjoy it. So anyway, I don't want to rant. I don't want to get into that. I'm just saying that's my little history on the Homestead Act from 1862, and some of my thoughts on homesteading and modern day stuff. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you didn't find it interesting, hopefully you at least found it entertaining. I have a lot of fun putting this together, doing the research. I want to do more things. I mean, I love history. And I have fun trying to put these videos together and make them entertaining, as well as informative. So I'll be doing other things, I hope. If y'all have any ideas for me to do one on, I'll sure enough do it just to see if it's fun. But I thank y'all for watching. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. I appreciate that. And you can subscribe if you want to see some more. They'll be coming. And I hope you have a good day. This is Joe from St. Bernard Acres. I'm out.